Okay, so we start the 7th lecture by summarizing a little bit where are we, okay, and discussing also where we are going. You've probably noticed that, we've shifted the lecture, the external seminar of AXA Insurance, to next week because the person couldn't come this week, so we just moved it to next week. Then we will have one lecture on public social services, and we will discuss the case of hospitals and in general innovation in public health. And then we will have an additional external seminar on tourism and 2 sessions of group presentation. Now, one important thing is that I've added the lecture on Tuesday, 15 December, because we need to have 12 lectures. The alternative to this is to have 4 hours on December 1st. What do you think? Which, yeah.
The exam that we could do on December?
Yeah. That's the week of 15th. Okay. So if you think it's feasible for you, because this means that all of you have to present on the 1st of December, then it's fine for me. Otherwise, the only alternative we have is Tuesday 15th, because the Tuesday before is holiday, so we cannot have the lecture. What do you think? 1st of December. So you think you will be all ready to do presentation on the 1st of December? Talking about group works, how are we doing? I just have one topic that Michela was putting forward. We need to sort this out because otherwise we're going to be late in organizing everything. So has anyone made up his mind or her mind on that? Yeah? Rita?
We are starting the service called Spotify for music, an innovative music service.
Okay, and you're together with?
Jasper and other 2 stage, I guess.
Mans Ljungmark?
And Alex
Moreira. Okay. Others? Michele?
I am Eduardo e Francesca.
Yes. And your idea was to study low-cost companies? Okay. Others? Okay, think about that. Okay, I need to know that either next week or even via email, because this is something that we need to sort out as soon as possible. Okay. So what I will do today is introduce you to the case of personal services, discussing the specific sector of tourism. Okay, we will have an external presentation on this. Are we ready? Stefano? Okay, I know you now, so I can call your name. The case of tourism, we will have an external seminar discussing the specific implementation of innovation in the touristic sector. Okay, but what we will do today is try to understand what are the main characteristics of the touristic sector, how demand changed in this environment, and what about the supply. Okay, so let's do what we always do and start asking you, what do you think are the main characteristics of this sector? What distinguishes the touristic sector from any other sector that we've seen so far? Banks, insurance, mobile communication, knowledge-intensive business services. Yes? Okay, seasonality in consumption. What is the implication of this? Why is this an interesting issue for the sector?
peaks of demands in seasonal, like winter breaks or summer.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to leverage it, or you have to like shift to other kind of tourism, like business tourism, conference, and like that. I don't know if it's inside of the tourism sector.
Okay. So there is an issue of seasonality, which means that demand is really not continuous over time. Hello? And this means that companies have to understand how to manage the excess of capacity that they develop. Okay? If I build up a hotel, if there is seasonality in consumption, that means that during some periods of time the hotel is empty. Okay? But I'm paying for that, which means that I have excess of productive capacity, if you want, and this is a big problem for companies. Okay? So this is one of the most important issues in the sector that we are investigating today. Other issues that might be interesting in terms of developing innovation, in terms of understanding the competition in the sector and the patterns of demand. Yes?
The consumers are ever changing.
Okay.
We're going to have a stable, we don't have contracts, we're going to have the consumers using our product multiple times a year, once or twice a year.
Okay, so often, not always, but often, consumers like to change what they are consuming in this particular sector. Okay, this is very different from almost everything else we've seen, but probably for knowledge-intensive business services, because if you think of a bank, if you think of mobile communication companies, if you think of insurance, more or less, we are consuming always the same type of services. We are asking for the same type of services. In tourism, demand changes very often, not only over time, but also within specific groups of consumers. Okay? And this poses important challenges to the companies in the sector. Others. Yes?
The demand provides feedbacks on their experience. Like if you think of Booking.com, like all the websites that show like the review of the hotel or
Okay. So, similarly to what we've seen probably for the knowledge-intensive business sectors, although, again, that was a particular kind of service sector, here demand has a very active role. Okay, so it is not only a source of information or an idea of giving incentives to company to provide more services because, for example, demand increases in some particular segment, but demand provides actual feedback to the companies, which means that very often companies design their touristic services on specific customer needs. Okay? And not only that, but very often consumers build up their own services in this sector. Okay? So taking different bits and pieces from different companies, they basically design their own specific touristic service. Okay? So whenever you think about the specificities of the service industry taken as a whole, here we really observe an important role of the demand. Okay? Similarly to what we've seen in the KIBS, in the knowledge-intensive business services, but of course here we're talking about personal services. So we're talking more about individual consumers than about business companies. Okay? So all that has to do with demand changes, the fact that demand provides feedbacks, can be summarizing saying that tourism services are experience goods, okay? Which means that you can really understand the value of the good only after having consumed it. Okay? Usually experience goods are found in the area of information-intensive services, okay? But touristic services can be considered as experience goods. Okay? This created two patterns in the development of consumption of tourism over time. On the one hand, you have customization, which means mass production, but of the made-to-measure. So the idea that I can provide a specific service to many people around, but I have to understand what are the needs of specific individuals. And second, I need to build trust. Okay? And trust can be built also exploiting this idea that consumers can provide feedbacks to the companies. For example, exploiting all the ICT environment. Okay? We will come back to the trust issue. Second, this is something that you haven't mentioned because we tend to think a lot about the demand side, but think about the supply side of this sector. Okay? Think about companies. basically, what you buy when you buy a touristic service is a bundle of different products, of different services, okay? Which means that you want to go on holiday somewhere, at least you need to book an hotel, a room somewhere. You need to fly or take a train or even going by car somewhere, okay? At the very, very basic level, you're buying different services from very different companies, okay? You have a transport company involved, you have a hotel provider involved, you might have a travel agent involved, okay? So whenever we think about the touristic sector, we have to remember that it is made of very different companies that have to face competition in their own specific sector and has also to understand the competition in the overall touristic sector, okay? So if I'm a hotel provider, for example, I have to understand what my direct competitors are doing, but I also have to understand what the airline companies are doing, how travel agencies are moving around, in order to understand how they are directing consumers' demand, okay? Third, tourism is an activity which is extremely rooted from a specialty point of view, okay? So the idea is that the real value added of that activity, of that specific service, is actually the place where you go, the attractions, the lodging facilities, the historical heritage, if you want, and anything else, okay? Because in the end, what consumers are interested is visiting some places somewhere, okay? So this is a very important point to remember because often people think that, you know, I'm a very good company in this particular sector if I manage to move demand around from one place to the other. Well, the bottom line is that consumers look for specific places, okay? You first think of where you want to go, and then you look for specific touristic bundles, you look for other different characteristics, okay? In this sense, we talk about personal services, we talk about services that are extremely customized because it's actually the users that ask for the specific services given specific needs, okay? It's not like a user who wants to open a bank account and looks around for the best company, okay? Here, I want to go to London and then try to understand what is the best way for me to visit London, okay? And I can exploit a whole series of different packages, right? So the issue here is really to understand that this is the value added, okay? Everything else is a way for companies to increase their efficiency and to build up trust, confidence in consumers, okay? Let aside the fact that very often consumers travel alone. So they even do not need, for example, a travel agency. Very often they do not need specific trust in a hotel chain or something. They just experience, they like to experience touristic product, touristic services, okay? So the whole innovation in this sector has been directed in a way of trying to increase the value that different people get from different experiences in tourism, okay? Other features that characterize this sector. Of course, this sector has important linkages with the leisure industry on the one hand and is extremely capital intensity, okay? Which means that when you describe and when you try to analyze this particular industry, you can think of the industrialization approach, okay? So this is an industry which deals with personal services, but where capital assets are extremely important, okay? So for example, innovation in the urban tourism, so simply going around in town, affect the supply of leisure activities around, okay? So if for some reason I have a big bunch of demand that is going in particular areas, then it's likely that the leisure activities in that area are going to develop, okay? And the other way around as well. There are very large capital assets involved. So again, this is an interesting case because on the one hand, the services are extremely customized. Very often, again, the users design their own services. On the other hand, companies that are involved in this sector spend lots of money on capital assets, okay? Airlines, hotels, car rental firms. If you only think about these three, and this is just an example, of course, there are economies of scale. Okay? Now, how can we bridge economies of scales with this issue, for example? Okay? Because, of course, once you've invested a large amount of money in building up hotel chains, you want these hotels to be full or almost full in any time of the year. But tourism, by definition, is characterized by some seasonality. Okay? So large capital assets demand economies of scale. On the other hand, you have a demand that shifts very much and tends to be seasonal. Okay? So its characteristics are really related to specific time period or to specific areas as well. Capital assets involved, but also very high labor intensity, especially in the distribution. Okay? And here, think more of travel agencies, think more of restaurants, of any kind of face-to-face contact between the tourist and different providers that are involved in the provision of touristic services on the spot. Okay? So if you want large capital assets, it has to do more with the idea of tourists searching for a specific destination. The labor intensity happens when tourists arrive at a specific destination and need to exploit the different services that are involved. Consumers participate very actively in the production, if you want, in the distribution of different holidays, of different touristic packages. Okay. This implies that offers that are not used, that are not exploited, cannot be stored. Okay. And one of the biggest problems in tourism is indeed the efficient capacity utilization. So remember this, because this really drives the competition in the market. Okay? So the idea is that I have to provide customized services, but since this activity is based on very large capital assets, at least has been based for a long time, this means that I have to couple the shifts in demand with the need for an efficient capacity utilization. And this is a big problem. Okay? So how do you convince people to go to the Red Sea in November? This is the issue. How do you convince people to go to the mountains in summertime? Okay? So this is the issue. This actually has also been one of the most important drivers of change, because as Rita was mentioning between the lines, what can you do to, for example, fill up a hotel during off-peak periods? What do companies do? What? Discounts. Okay, discounts or prices, 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 or what can they exploit? Yes?
They may try to shift from touristic sector to the business sector.
Okay, from, let's say, individual consumers' holidays to business trips. Okay? So very often you make some agreements with companies that have to do their convention in some specific places, and you provide discount services in order for your hotel or your resort, whatever, to be filled up. Okay? So again, changes in demand that are not really autonomous, but are somehow driven by the needs of the supply. I need to efficiently utilize my capacity. I try to convince other categories of users, for example, business users, to exploit my services off time. Okay? Now, these are the main characteristics of tourism. What are the potential areas for innovation? So what happened in the touristic industry over time? If you think of the market, okay, there are two very important changes that drove somehow companies to provide innovative services over time. The first has to do with market saturation. Okay? You're young, so for you it's quite obvious to go on holiday, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 times a year. Okay? A while ago, not a very long time ago, people weren't used to go on holidays at all times. Okay? Market saturation occurred. And market saturation had two important consequences. The first, you remember when we discussed it with the mobile communication services, well, firms have lots of demand out there. The incentives are going up. Incentives to provide different type of services, also for very small companies. Okay? The second important change that market saturation brought is that consumers more and more look for experience rather than for destination. Okay? Experience of any kind, entertainment, educational, sports, whatever. Okay? Which means that really the activity, especially in terms of innovation of different companies, has moved, okay, from giving value to what a specific place has to trying to market a destination which in itself is not particularly valuable. Okay? Can you think of an example of this? It's not difficult to convince people to go to Rome. Okay? This is pretty straightforward. It's more difficult to build up a holiday around something which is not particularly valuable from an historical point of view or from other cultural perspective. What's happening in the world? What are people looking for when they go on holiday? Yes?
They take places that are probably not very attractive from an historical point of view, and they turn it into a theme sort of vacation. For example, sport theme or
Okay. Yes?
I don't know if everywhere in the world, but in Italy, for sure, it's increasing the segment of enogastronomic tourism.
Okay. So provide an experience which doesn't have very much to do with the, let's say, attraction that are there, but has more to do with the experience that consumer can actually make when they go somewhere. Yes?
I think maybe there was a trend over standardizing. Like if you think of Club Med or I don't know, Venture Club, like leisure places, if you go to that sea or to Sicily or to whatever, you don't even realize where you are. Because everything is the same. Wake up, you move, the dance floor, the pool, and stuff.
Okay. Very interesting comment from Michela. Okay, so we have a trend here which has to do with the emergence of cultural activities, sports activities, wellness activities anywhere. So I do not really care where I am because I'm interested in the specific activities that I can do there. And the second big trend, which is somehow related to the first one, although in a very, very different manner from the supply perspective, is that if I'm going to a Club Med, I do not really care if I'm in the Red Sea, if I'm in Maldives, if I'm in Sicily. Okay, everything looks exactly the same. But I've never been there, but I don't know if some of you have experienced one of these big resorts. Okay, the services are extremely standardized, extremely standardized. So this is an interesting pattern because market saturation means an increase in the number of consumers. Okay, consumers might be very different, so I might try to exploit the idea that consumers do not look for destination, but they look for specific experiences. But I might also exploit the size and saying, look, I'm providing you, let's say, a high-quality type of services, okay, at relatively low prices because I can exploit the scale. So come to my Club Med in the middle of nowhere, okay, and you will have exactly the same services that you get if you go in a very nice place, okay? So keep in mind these things. Market saturation meant also that tourism became over time more and more a relationship business, so that consumers provide feedbacks to the companies, and that somehow it is important to build on a company's or destination strength and core competencies. Okay? Now, if consumers move from destination to experience, the company core competencies become very important. Okay? So again, if I do not care where I am, as long as I'm in a Club Med, then it's Club Med I'm looking for. It's not anymore a very nice seaside place. Okay? If it's a very, I don't know, challenging sport holiday that I'm looking for, okay, I'm looking for specialized providers. And whether I'm in the Alps or I'm in a place in the middle of nowhere, I do not care. Okay? Very big change in the idea of tourism. Now, the big problem with experience good in general, with touristic service in particular, is that the quality of service is very uncertain. Okay? Because if you do not experience the service, chances are pretty good that you cannot really evaluate that, even talking with people. Okay? This is a field where really demand is heterogeneous. But it's not heterogeneous because, you know, someone like Vodafone and someone like TIM. It's not that kind of heterogeneity. Okay? Here, people really have intrinsic different preferences, okay, for different features. So if I asked around you, where did you go on holiday last year, Stefano? In the summertime, let's say.
I went to
Finland?
Finland.
Okay, let's say Finland. I like this. Rita?
Tuscany.
Tuscany? Cosa? Turkey? Sardinia? Michela?
Spain.
Spain? Stefano? Corfu? Michele? Ibiza, Spain. What about you two? Turkey. Okay. How many of you would like to go to Finland for holidays? No one. Okay. Okay. How many of you would like to go to Tuscany for holidays? Okay, some. Okay. What about Spain? Wow. Okay. I like very much the Finland case because that's a very interesting example of what we are talking about. Okay. So there are people who go to places where other people wouldn't really even consider going despite the prices, for example. Okay? They do not have any intrinsic preference for going where it's cold during summertime, even as simple as this. Okay? So the idea that you have a specific quality of service really depends on what you're looking for. Okay? And it's very difficult for people to transfer, to give feedback to other consumers, not to the companies, but to other consumers. Okay? The second big change, and we will try to delve into this more in depth now, is that there has been an evolution of demand. First of all, because the percentage of time spent working versus the percentage of time spent in leisure activity changed dramatically over time. The population is aging, okay, at least in developed countries. And of course, this also implies very big change in the type of activities that you're looking for. There is an increasing individualization. There is an increasing demand for quality, okay? We're looking at the evolution of the touristic sector over time, although, again, if you look at your own experience, you've probably seen just a small bit of that, okay? But these trends have had an important impact on the demand for touristic services, and of course, these are potential areas for innovation as well. Now, think more about demand, okay? So think about consumers. We're talking about the aging population, so this is a matter of fact, especially in developed countries, which of course are the countries where most of people are traveling. Okay, population is aging. What else has happened over time? Think of the last 50 years. Okay, the touristic sector more or less, well, it's always been there, but it started having a relevance from the 1950s, 1960s onwards. Okay, what happened over time to demand, to the consumers? What do you think happened? What are the big changes? Do not think specifically of the touristic sector. Yes?
The ease of transportation.
Okay, ease of transportation. So, for example, people started having even a car. Okay. This is something that happened very recently, but ease of transportation. Yes?
Finding information is much more easy.
Okay. Finding information. What? Yeah, but think about consumers' characteristics. Do not think about the touristic sector itself. Think about the demand, okay? This is something that happened over time, ease of transportation. Again, I bring you back 30 or 40 years ago. So we're not just talking about the low-cost companies, okay? We're talking about the fact of people having a means of transport where they didn't, okay? Ease of finding information. Okay, so ease of finding information and, let's say, autonomy in the search of increasing autonomy in the search of different services. But think a bit more at the more aggregate level, the big trends in the population. Yes?
I don't know, maybe it's something that's a stupid comment, but if you think, I don't know, maybe my grandmother, when
Yeah.
my mom was young,
Yeah.
used to go to the seaside from the 1st of July to the 1st of September.
Yes?
And my grandparents used to visit them like on the weekends and stuff. Now, like, I don't know, my mom works, for example, so I've never done for 2 months at the seaside with my mother or something.
Okay.
With my grandmothers and stuff. So maybe the habits are changing, and what we're looking for is no more the nice house near the seaside, near Milan, so we can visit each other. Maybe something different, something more broad.
Okay, let's write it down again because I had put it just in a small notice there, but really the distribution of time between working and leisure is a very important trend. Okay, also when I was a kid, we used to stay 1 month at the seaside. Okay, it is very difficult that a mother can right now do it if she's working, for example. Other trends? Well, let's think a bit more about exogenous factors of change in consumers' attitude, okay, in the last 2 or 3 decades. So this is something that has to do, well, besides ease of transport and this idea of working versus leisure time, this is something that characterizes very much the tourism sector, okay? But increasing GDP over time, okay? It is true that people have more ease of finding information, more ease of transport, they are more autonomous, they work more over time, okay? All this has to do with the general trend of increasing GDP. The increase in GDP, if you think of this in not only economic terms, but also sociological terms, means that people progressively aim at satisfying superior order needs. Okay? Think also of the shift in terms of tourist destination and of the shift of the evolution of tourism across different countries. Okay? Demand becomes much more differentiated, much more sophisticated. Okay? This does not only mean that people can find information more easily, it means that they develop more specific needs. Okay? Which means that we're not going to the seaside on the Adriatic coast in Italy at the same time in the same place, as it used to be. Okay? And that also has to do with the supply side, but we'll come back to that later. People can travel more because of the increase in GDP, and they can travel also more independently. Okay? Think about this. They are less dependent also on the price structure of different touristic services. Okay? Second, I'm surprised that no one mentioned this as a very big trend which characterizes the society as a whole, but the touristic sector in a very, very massive way. Increasing awareness of environmental issues. Okay? This, on the one hand, brings a change in consumers' attitude towards specific consumption styles, towards specific services. On the other hand, bring changes in holidays that are provided over time. There is an increase in amount of holidays that are located in the so-called ecologically sustainable farms. Okay, probably no one of you would go on holiday on such a place, but this is one of the most profitable area right now of the touristic sector. Something that you wouldn't have thought about even 10 or 15 years ago. Okay, something that goes exactly in the opposite direction of the Club Med sort of thing. Okay, so increase in GDP, I aim at satisfying more sophisticated needs, sophisticated and differentiated from other people. I can travel more and more independently. Second, increasing awareness of environmental issues. Okay, this changes also the way in which I'm consuming products. Yes.
As for the increase in GDP, I mean, the assumption is that since GDP is increasing, people are richer, so they can afford to travel. But actually, what stands by the evidence is that people that even don't have so much money go on vacation, do more mortgages to go to vacation. So maybe Maslow pyramid is changing. Maybe it is an essential need now, even if at the beginning it was on the peak.
Absolutely. Yes, yes. I totally agree with you. It is a fact that if you are richer, you can travel more. Okay, so we are looking at this in a positive, non-normative sense. But it is absolutely true that if more people travel, then the idea of traveling shifts from being a superior order needs to being an essential needs. If everyone is doing something, okay, if that's part of everyone's life, then also people who have less availability of resources travel. Okay, and it is true that people ask for credits, for example, for traveling. They do leasing, mortgages, or any kind of thing. Okay, this is really something that people do not want to give up. Okay, so remember that in general, the expenditure for touristic activities, however you want to consider them, is something that does not go down even in time of crisis. Okay, they change the structure, they change the characteristics, but the idea of exploiting the leisure activities during leisure time versus the routine working activities is something that people are really keen on satisfying. Third big trend, again, not only of the touristic sector, but also of the society as a whole, an increase in health problems. Think of obesity. Okay? What are the implications of this? The implication of this is that people start searching for natural products, okay, and sporting holidays, rural holidays, all the wellness segment has started boosting right now in terms of demand. Okay, this is really driven by this specific trend. Okay, it goes hand in hand with the awareness of environmental issue, but it is not exactly the same thing. Okay, so 30 years ago, you wouldn't have had the development of all the wellness spa centers around. Okay, travel agencies are building up touristic packages on those things. Okay, you wouldn't have gone on, I don't know, extreme sporting holidays years and years ago because you want to relax on holidays, okay? These are really recent trends. And somehow they have to do with the increase in health problems, with the fact that, you know, consumers are living in progressively lower quality environment, and so they look for something that is really different from what they are used to in their standard routine life. Okay, so increase in GDP, environmental issues coming up, increase in health problems, and we want to go even broader, the evolution of capitalism. Okay, Let's go back to the Club Med example. I haven't nothing against the Club Med, but just to make you understand the issue, okay? At some point, we will see the development of the touristic business in detail, but at some point, the very large-scale touristic service delivery was basically the only way in which consumers could actually exploit touristic services, okay? Now, the way in which the society and the economy evolved over time implied that this type of experience has been progressively perceived as an alienating experience for those involved, okay? Which means that we're all doing exactly the same thing. We're bombed by advertising, by the Club Med, or by other type of companies, and we want to do something different. We want to satisfy a completely different need. There has been a massive reaction against the mass consumption, okay? So together with the emergence of specific requirements, health-related holidays, environment-related holidays, there also has been a reaction against mass consumption, against let's do all the same, okay? And this, just to put what Michela was saying and about the working leisure time in more words, the idea is that an increasing number of middle-class and professional people that are the ones who travel more, okay? Francesco, is everything okay? Okay. The increased bureaucratization, external monitoring, performance assessment, all this kind of activity, okay, sort of hindered self-realization, self-expression in the work time, which means that consumers tend to exploit more and more personalized touristic services just because they want to run away from the standardized routine environment in which they're embedded in. Okay? This is a very general trend, but it is affecting the way in which users and consumers are actually exploiting the touristic services. Okay? These trends in demand, again, are not specific of the touristic sector, but have important impacts on it. Okay? Because they give actually opportunity to different companies to identify specific needs and to provide a specific service that satisfies a very small scale, if you think of consumers. Okay? So we go from very large scale touristic delivery to smaller scale, but more customized. Okay? We'll discuss about the price issue. Stefano, when you talked about the price, we were talking about the change in demand. What did you have in mind?
Exchange rates.
Ah, okay. That's different from, that's something which is important. Okay, so exchange rates, even the monetary union, in some respect, affected the evolution of touristic activities. Okay, we'll come back to prices. Do you think that the price of touristic services have gone down or up? Can you travel more cheaply?
Yes.
Right now? Yes, which means that if I want to enter the business, it's not going to be profitable in the long run? Or qualify a little bit this yes.
Now, instead of buying a bundle of a flight plus the hotel, I can travel on my own and then quickly start.
Okay, so since you do not need intermediaries anymore, let's put it like this, at least you do not pay the cost of the intermediation. Okay, flights have become cheaper probably, but in general you have more offering, and so you can exploit lower prices. What about the supply then? Because if these are the trends, so we're talking about individualization, we're talking about consumers know much more, there is a need of finding information. Why should I invest in a touristic business of any sort?
Because it has for banks and stuff to go nowadays. So I think it's very profitable. Yeah.
Okay, it's
You won't get shortage of customers.
okay. You won't get shortage of customers, and we are comfortable with that. But what Stefano is saying, and is not wrong, is okay. But my profits depend on the quantity, the demand, but depends also on the price that I can charge for them. Okay, and if the price is very low, it's true that everyone is traveling around, but then tourism becomes a commodity over time, which means that either I have very large-scale facilities or I have trouble in meeting the sort of requirements in terms of efficiency in order to be in the market. Okay.
More customers with low prices.
Okay.
This does not imply that the profits are.
Okay. Okay.
I think it's a good idea to invest in the tourist sector. You have one of the highest rates of bankruptcy, and you have one of the highest rates of bankruptcy in the supplier side, for example, travel flying companies. That's very, very risky.
Okay, so you actually believe that it's a risky business. You wouldn't go along the line of what Michela and Stefano are suggesting. You wouldn't invest in such a business. Other ideas? Yes, because this is an important issue. Yeah.
We are taking a course that knows also about tourism, and actually they said that in tourism is not so risky because if you, for example, invest in buying an hotel, I don't know, still, I mean, if people don't come, still you have something material on which you can change destination and invest in. You seem like less risky than other things. And I personally think that like it is today, the business model of a travel agency is not viable anymore. They have to focus on different segments, maybe change their capabilities. I mean, for example, Fiat is organizing a lot of I don't know, travels for its employees. Okay, you become a supplier of business services, so you organize all the travels for these employees, for example.
Okay.
It can be profitable in this sense.
Okay, other comments on this? So Achille wouldn't invest at all in the business.
The problem is really that if you have a travel agency that is just bundling different suppliers, you are relying on the suppliers, and in this sector the suppliers are really, really risky. So if you're in another case, if you're a cruise company, you own the whole bunch of currencies, you own everything, and you can be sure you're not that risky anymore.
Okay, so you're qualifying your, let's say, perception of the tourism as a risky business, saying unless you're vertically integrated, which, okay, is not really applicable in terms of the industrial vertical integration, but the idea is that if I can provide all the products and services that go into the bundles, and this is for very few companies, then I can be sure that if I'm losing money, for example, on the transport of people around, I can charge higher prices on different services. Okay? Rita was pointing at a different kind of trend, which was, well, we are making very general statements and comments about the mass consumption of tourism, but remember that there are still hotels, travel agencies, especially travel agencies, a bit less transport companies, that provide extremely expensive and customized holidays. Okay? So you have a bunch of people who are still spending lots of money because they want to do something that no one else is doing, first of all, because that specific touristic packages addresses his or her own specific needs for which I'm willing to pay a lot of money, okay? Or because companies are exploiting very general demand trends and large scale is not anymore an issue, okay, as it used to be. But it's still, I mean, it's correct saying that at least in the travel agency and in the transport company, less in the hotel business, you have lots of failure of new companies. You need somehow a big scale. You need to exploit, and we come to the supply, the availability of new technology. Okay? the tourism is the most diffused e-commerce services. Okay, ICT changed lots of service provision. Still, we've seen that in many areas, you still need a brick and mortar structure in order to provide services. Tourism is one of those services which has really been changed by the advent of ICT. Okay? It required the development of new skills on the supply side, especially in tourism managing, okay? E-marketing skills, for example, as well as interactive fields, for example, in the fields of wellness or adventure tourism. Okay, so not only ICT, but also new changes in demand that drove the emergence of different skills on the supply side. Okay. The strong competition due to the use of ICT, the slowing demand in terms of price quantity, and the process of globalization, okay, we haven't yet mentioned this, makes the supply of touristic services potentially in danger unless companies find a way of challenging these specific changes and exploiting them. Okay, either providing very specialized services or going on the mass consumption, exploiting very general trends, globalization, for example. Okay, numbers. These are the international tourist arrivals. Okay, by region. The base year is 1995. Okay, these are forecasts for 2010. Well, 2020, we don't know what's going to happen. The average annual growth rate. Okay, East Asia and Pacific 6.5 growth rate. Africa 5.5. Middle East 7.1. South Asia 6.2. Europe not doing very well. Americas not doing very well. Of course, this is a sort of catching up, but still, it's very relevant. Still, Europe has more or less half of the all international tourists arrival. Okay? Of course, as Stefano was saying, there is a very important issue that we are not going to investigate in detail that relates to the exchange rates. Okay? And lots of people in Europe travel from within Europe, which of course increases the share, but still, I mean, this is an interesting figure. Let's look a little bit at the dynamics from 1950 to 2005, estimated 2005. Okay, this is the longer time series that is available, taking into account the same type of statistics. Middle East increased massively, okay, at an average rate of 10% per year. Asia and Pacific, 13%. Americas, Europe, okay? And this always are figures in million. Okay, so tourism is changing, the destination is changing. Remember that changes are not taking place just across different areas, but are taking place also within specific countries, in particular within areas that have reached a certain level of market saturation. Now, we said that consumers in this sector are active source of information. So it's not just a matter of collecting information of international tourist arrival statistics, but it's also a matter of consumers giving feedback to companies that are providing different services, not only travel agencies, but also hotels, transport companies, all sorts of companies. Okay? So the shifts in demand, the emergence of new types of touristic activities demanded a change in the operators' learning strategies. Okay? And operators went from productivity control, basically from searching for efficiency, okay, to the exploitation of knowledge on consumers' preferences and behavior. Okay? This is a trend that we've seen in many services. Okay, so first I look at the efficiency, I try to control my productivity, to increase the productivity, and then I move to the observation of consumers' needs and preferences. Okay? In other words, this means that companies went from process innovation, if you want, to the development of service innovation, customized product innovation, which should remind you a little bit of Barra's reverse product cycle. And that happened even in tourism. Okay? Think even of the introduction of ICT. This is a very general trend. So if you look from the 1950s onwards, you see the shift from process innovation to product or service innovation. But even if you look just at the period of the introduction of ICT in the touristic business, what you see is that companies went from the back office automation of different services, for example, online reservation, to the development of online product, online services. Okay? For example, the auction mechanism, which lies behind many websites, even if you do not realize it. Okay? Or, of course, all the last-minute offerings. Okay? So many websites, many intermediaries, actually, they are not really travel agency, but they are some sort of travel agency, now employ this mechanism of auction, even without telling you. So you're not making an offer. Okay? They basically develop the auction on the basis of the demand for a specific service. So if you go to eDreams website, okay, behind eDreams there is an auction that you do not observe, okay, and is based on the supply-demand interaction. Very interesting case. Okay, last-minute offerings, well, that's more easy to understand. Simply, in order to fight the excess of capacity, because this is what it's all about, companies are trying to downprice their services in order to not have a waste of offering or capacity. Is ICT in tourism a big thing? Again, I like always to show numbers because sometimes people say, yeah, everyone is booking online, no one is using travel agency anymore, everyone is using websites. This is the market share of internet users, online booking, online searching, and this is the percentage of change. This is more interesting. So this is where users get the information, multiple responses are allowed, so it doesn't sum up to 100. And this is actually how users book their services. Okay? The internet, of course, has the biggest share, but still travel agencies are important. Okay? Friends, relative, travel guide, newspaper, other, which might mean, for example, association clubs, companies that book for you. Okay? So yes, ICT is important. Yes, users are, these are consumers, by the way, are using more and more the internet in order to exploit the touristic services, but remember that travel operators are still very important. Okay? What is happening is that travel operators are actually addressing bigger customers. So they tend to leverage upon the scale, trying to provide the services to big customers. Looking at the shifts of the demand, so the idea that companies went from process to product and service innovation, what we can say is that there have been more or less 3 big phases in the touristic activity. The first is the so-called pre-Fordist tourism. Now, this might look like the current state of the touristic business, beside the fact that, of course, we do have technological innovation. Until 1950, it was a very small family business. It was really a seasonal activity. So you had peaks of demand, and then hotels and travel agencies were actually shutting down, and contract as well. Okay? We've said that the touristic business is both capital intensive and labor intensive. Okay? The fact that the activity is very often seasonal has an important impact in the economy in terms of labor contracts. Okay? So this is a side issue which you should remember. Of course, there were no technological innovation. Okay? Most of consumers in these stages were extremely wealthy consumers who could afford to travel, for example, who could have a car, okay, or who could just pay a very high amount of money just to travel around. For this tourism, which is basically the area of mass tourism, someone calls this the McDonaldization stage of the touristic industry. Okay? This is when Thomas Cook also emerges. This is one of the biggest operator. Here, the main innovation, if you want, is the provision of tourism packages. Okay? So at the very early stage of the touristic industry, okay, the business was really made of very small companies. Users were actually choosing their own destination, and they were exploiting the providers of few and small companies. Here you have the other way around. So you have different bundles of touristic services that are sold to a more and more heterogeneous group of customers. You have some innovation, but not in the delivery of the service itself, but more in the related industries. For example, air transport, of course, hotels, and everything. So together with architectural innovations, remember always the different types of innovation that we tend to distinguish in the service sector, we have some form of formalization innovation. After all, the standardized packages, let's go back to Club Med, were born in this area, not specifically Club Med, but the idea of providing a standardized service for mass demand emerged in this phase. Okay? The exploitation of technological innovation and organizational innovation in other sectors, the increase of GDP. Of course, we're talking after the 1950s. This was a big change. People started traveling around. People started looking for different destinations. Companies were leveraging upon the demand, which was relatively homogeneous and could actually provide a very large scale to companies. Okay? In this period, someone has talked about the so-called double social revolution of paid holidays on the one hand and private car diffusion on the other hand. Okay? And the idea that these two changes, okay, allowed sort of new destinations for all, which means, for example, that some destinations that were extremely exclusive from a demand point of view become available to all. If you think in these terms, you can also reason in these terms right now. Okay? So what Rita was saying, it's true that the increase in GDP provides consumers with the need of satisfying more and more sophisticated requirements, but on the other hand, okay, if everyone is traveling, this means that everyone can go to the Red Sea, that everyone can go to the United States at relatively low prices. Okay? New destination for all. Right now, this is driven mostly by price. At that time, it was driven more by the availability of different assets that were sort of improving consumers' lifestyles and were allowing consumers to travel around. Okay? So pre-Fordist tourism, the traditional Fordist tourism, and then the post-Fordism, okay, which saw the emergence of very specialized and customized niche market tourism already from the mid-70s. And then to this, we add the emergence of ICT and the flexibility, which, of course, increased the competition in the market, because now online travel market and tour operators are actually competing with traditional tour operators. We have an increasing self-organized touring trend, okay, which was boosted by the emergence of ICT, which means that companies have to find ways, new ways of making profits. And some companies are actually making profits, so this is not a non-profitable business. Okay? It's risky, but if you find your way, you make lots of money. Okay? And just to summarize what we've seen from the demand side, on the supply side, individualism, sustainability, the development of niche sector, the reorganization of the industry, okay, are the main trends that characterize also the supply side. Now, one observation on this. Seasonality was singled out as one of the most important features in the tourism business and one of the most problematic features in the tourism business. Now, the reorganization of the industry demanded that companies started thinking in terms of an all-year-long business. Okay, so we do not have seasonality anymore in our activity. We might have it in specific labor contracts, for example, or in specific related activities. Okay, but a hotel has to be active all year long, not to talk about, of course, transport companies. But both travel agencies and hotels, big hotels chain in particular, are trying to limit the effect of seasonality, which means are trying to invest very much in the efficient use of capacity. Okay? And again, in periods where you cannot really leverage upon economies of scale, because you have lots of individualism, people are traveling a different time of the year, what you can do is trying to provide specific and customized services in order to limit the effect of seasonality. Now, Rita before was saying, well, it's true that the increase of GDP has driven an increase in the sophistication of user needs. Okay, but as all tourists require more and more quality, okay, and they require specific standards in niche products, this means that these niche products are becoming more and more common. Okay, so we're not talking here about the overall touristic industry, but we're talking about products or holidays that emerged in niche markets, okay, ecologically sustainable farms or extreme sporting holidays, and are now becoming appealing to more and more consumers. Why is that? Because these holidays require a very high quality standards, so they need to respect the standard, which means that they're not anymore very customized. They need to respect a certain level of standard in order to satisfy consumers' needs. Okay? And again, the idea is that you go from mass customization to very specific touristic packages to niche products that, again, because of the high quality standard, become somehow a mass product. Okay? So now the all wellness activities, for example, in tourism is something that is exploited by many different people, many heterogeneous consumers, and that was built originally, okay, for a specific niche of the market. So put together the characteristics of demand, okay, and the characteristics of supply. We can describe the demand patterns in the touristic sector looking at the combination of the individualism of consumer and the complexity of services provided on the supply side. Okay? So for this tourism is basically the combination of mass customization and the provision of very, very simple services. Okay? Price is the issue. Is the issue for the supply, is the issue for the demand. You can leverage it upon very large scale. So this is something that you can exploit. Uncertainty is not very high. After all, if you go in a Club Med, you know what you're getting. Okay? Competition is really price-based, and this is actually where the business becomes risky if you do not have the size to operate in that particular area. Aquila before was mentioning the case of cruises. Okay? This is an example, well, at least in its basic form, of the Fordist tourism. Okay? Organized tours, staying clubs, cruises are all combination of group holidays on the one hand, demand, and the provision of relatively simple services on the other hand. If we move from the search for group holidays to the individualization of tourism, okay, but still with the provision of very simple services, we can talk about camping, family tourism, seaside holiday, rural tourism. Okay? The way in which people evaluate the quality of service has to do more with the relationship they establish. Okay, so when Michaela was spending 2 months, Michaela's grandmother was spending 2 months at the seaside, she probably knew very well the hotel manager. She probably was going to the same hotel all the time because you really look for the relationship. Okay? You do not care very much about uncertainty after all. I mean, we're talking about the provision of very simple services. Competition is still on price because, again, you're not leveraging upon the sophisticated needs of consumers, but very often people get attracted to a specific destination and they tend to replicate, okay, the consumption of touristic products in that particular area. This has to do, again, with the provision of very simple services across different stages of demand. Okay? So, group holidays, individual holidays. We're looking at this over time, but remember that these two types of consumers coexist, okay, in each stage. So even in the period of massive Fordist tourism, there still were people who were going on holiday by themselves, and even in periods of very individualistic exploitation of touristic services, we do have group holidays, okay? So remember that there is a coexistence of this, although we observe very big trends. The advent of ICT allowed companies and consumers to exploit more and more complex services, where complex does not mean sophisticated. It means that the bundling of different services together has become more and more sophisticated. Okay? So self-organized tourism competition is based on prices and on the originality of activities. So people look for destination or for specific touristic packages that no one else has exploited before. And, of course, uncertainty is very high. It's very high on the supply side and it's very high on the demand side. Okay? This is also another big trend. Backpacking in off-beat locations. I wouldn't mention Finland, but this sort of thing, you just go around, you go somewhere where no one else has gone before, you do not know what you can expect, okay, you're going on your own, and so on. And remember also this, which is very important, going back to the discussion we had about price, okay? There are still people who are paying lots of money to go on holiday, even on group holidays, okay? So group holidays do not mean just cheap Club Med experience in the middle of nowhere. Okay? It means also very expensive cruises, for example. Okay? Luxury cruises, sophisticated organized travel, very high-level sporting stays as well. Okay? So here the evaluation of quality has to do with the satisfaction of individual expectations. So I'm paying lots of money, so I want to have a very high quality of the services. The uncertainty, well, this depends very much on the type of companies that are operating in the sector where I'm based. The competition is really quality-based. Price does not have anything to do with this specific competition. With the provision of more complex service, if you want, company can make profits. Okay? Even if you're small, well, maybe not for this kind, but of activities, but for this kind of touristic activities, even if you do not have a very large scale, you can leverage upon consumers' requirements, consumers' needs. You can actually make people pay for your services. Okay? The first two types of activities which require the provision of relatively simple and standardized services tend to require a large scale. Okay? So even in terms of dimension of firms that are competing in the sector, depending on the demand requirements, we observe very different scale of the companies that are in the sector. Having said that, what are the innovation patterns in the industry? So how can company actually innovate in the industry? To ask this, we need to understand where are the competencies located. Okay? So if you had to choose between these three types of activities. Let's say not hotels, but accommodation. Where would you invest? If you would like to, I don't know, start up a company in this sector, what kind of company would you start up? You do not have a very entrepreneurial attitude, I know this, because you're bound by what? Accommodation. So you would provide. Okay. Okay, high quality accommodation. Okay. Others? So Valentina would say, okay, I'm not offering bundles of services I do not care very much. I want to offer a relatively small scale service for maybe not very wealthy people, but for people who want to experience something different from what they're used to. Others? Ideas? You wouldn't invest in this, well, Kille wouldn't invest in the sector, we've understood this. Other services that you might think are innovative and are worth exploiting in terms of profitability. So how can you exploit innovation? How can you change the way in which the touristic services are provided in order to make money?
I would look at traveling communities.
Okay, traveling communities. So this is also an interesting thing that we haven't discussed very much. So traveling communities such as okay, very interesting case study also, the couch surfing. It is a sort of traveling community. Well, they need to travel, basically. Okay, here it's, if you want user-generated content in a way, companies could make money trying to exploit this sort of communities. Yeah. No.
I was going to say, I don't think couch surfing is that much profitable because it's like traveling. It's innovative, yes.
Right now, it is not commercially profitable, but because you have the usual, yeah.
They're targeting backpackers and
Yeah.
people with no money. So,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And also with like the generalization of tourism, everybody has access to everywhere, mostly anywhere in the world these days. So I would maybe create a company that would provide for like people that were interested in go to more remote places, like go to Sweden or Finland to see the Northern Lights. And,
Okay.
Siberia.
Okay.
Like
So
more remote places.
you're talking about this. So very specialized travel agencies. Yes.
I would open a travel agency for internship, like check for internship.
This is interesting. You could propose it to our friends. Okay. How, well. So it's always a specific type of travel agency. No one would invest in the transport companies, I guess. Okay. So what are the core competencies that are required to successfully address the changes in the demand and to develop new products? You have mentioned some very interesting cases. Actually, some of you could also investigate one of these cases for the group work, but just a suggestion. You remember Abernathy and Clark model? You probably have seen that, vaguely remember, trying to make up your mind. Okay, it is possible to think of that specific model that had to do basically with the changing competencies of different companies applied to the specific case of the touristic sector. Okay, and what you have is companies moving from the so-called regular innovation to architectural innovation. Okay, and this type of innovation drive changes in the industry, drive changes in the internal competencies and in the external relationships. Okay, so the Abernathy and Clark model had two different dimensions across which you can actually discuss the emergence of innovation. One is the internal competencies, the other is the external relationships, so the networking idea, if you want. Okay, and this specific innovation changed really the characteristics of the industry and the perception of the business in the society as a whole. Just to recall you what we are talking about, regular innovation is something that preserves both the internal competencies and the external relationships. Think of the business activity of tourism. There are tons of examples of this. These are sort of incremental innovation, if you want. Investments in larger facilities, changes in technology or time scheduling process, introduction of online booking, the internal training of personnel, the standard upgrading. Okay, one of the most important features in the accommodation business is, for example, the whole issue of the number of stars. Okay, these are all innovations that are regular in the sense that you do not need to build up new external relationship or to change the external relationship. You need a relatively small change in the internal competencies. Okay, you're just enlarging your own business. You're just changing a little bit the way in which you're providing business. A very interesting type of innovation in the touristic industry are the so-called niche innovation, okay, which still have to do with the same company, with the same competencies, but bring about change in the external relationship. Okay? For example, Valentina, who was interested in the development of the accommodation with a specific experience, rural tourism, okay, has developed in close connection with agricultural firms, with small farms, for example. Okay? This is a niche innovation in itself. You're providing a new product, a new bundle of services, if you want, okay? And you're doing that in close connection with external partners that are new to the firm, okay? Last two types. What Abernathy and Clark called revolutionary innovation, something that preserves the external relationship but change the internal competencies. In tourism, well, this has to do with the diffusion of ICT. Okay? It has to do with what we were mentioning before, the emergence of new types of skills that are required in the sector, e-marketing skills, for example, okay? Sales, electronic commerce, and so on and so forth. The most important type of innovation in this sector, well, not the most important, but the most profitable in terms of challenging the environment, are the architectural innovations. So architectural innovation are meant to change both the internal competencies of companies and the external relationships, which means the network, okay? The exploitation of entirely new resources, okay? For example, the Arctic tourism, the development of the so-called ice hotels, okay? Attractions that require the employment of a complete set of new designers, for example, architects, marketers, everything else. If you have to market an ice hotel, that's very different from marketing a rural farm, okay? So you really need to be skilled in that respect. And of course, architectural innovation might come when there is the need of redefining the infrastructure in response to changing regulation. Okay? For example, the ban on building up new tourism facilities in protected natural resources. Okay? Wars, right? So that I cannot go anymore in a place, I cannot exploit anymore a specific destination. Or natural catastrophe that really change the need of the companies and change the way in which companies are providing the services. Okay?